Okay. So I wanted to make a video on what would be the perfect amount of time for a human being, and specific me, to live. And the idea originally came from, there's a video on the Count of Saint Germain. It was this guy, and supposedly he lived for I think it was 400 years or something. Obviously, very, very likely not true. But it sparked this interest in what would be the perfect amount of time to live. Also watching Vampire Diaries and just stuff like that. So in this situation, it would be, I guess there's three. So there's everybody lives the amount of time that you choose, right? Or I don't really want to talk about that one. I'd rather talk about these two, which is one, you age slower than a normal human being. So let's say a normal human being lives till 90. Half of their life is going to be probably a quarter of their life is going to be when they're young and spry and able to walk around, and their brain is functioning very well. After you turn I think it's 23, your frontal lobe is fully developed, whatever. In this situation, we would take the same amount of years, and we would put that into a percentage. So if you were to go 400 years, I ran out of storage. Anyway, it would be the same thing as living so you'd be young for 100 years, 50 years, you would be noticing differences in age. 200 years, you'd be noticing a difference in age as you would if you were 50. And then the last 200 years of your life would be around the same as slowly you would become more elderly, your collagen would be worse, your skin would look worse, etc. And then the other option is you would not age at all, but then you would still die. So I would say if we're going down the option of you do age, I think if you didn't age, I would want, well, it's hard because I don't know if I would want more or less time. So I'll go into if you did age. I think if you did age, there's an argument towards, do I want more time to be young, or do I want less time altogether so that I don't have to live when I'm senile and getting older and stuff like that? And what would you do with that time? Which is, to me, the interesting part, obviously. That's the whole reason I'm doing it. So I would say, for me personally, I would do a lot of research. You have to think, if you have double the amount of time that a normal human being does have to live, you would just be smarter, right? Somebody who's been around longer. Obviously, older people are usually seen as wiser, so they would be, you would be a lot wiser. And then just the amount of research that you could do, I think, is amazing. You'd be able to, if you sat down for 50 of those 200 years and just researched all on how to cure cancer, you know what I mean? And because you already have 150 years of your life left, you might as well do that, right? And then let's say you come to that conclusion, 50 years straight, you're doing a bunch of research, right? Maybe you find the cure to cancer, right? If you want to get into it specifically, maybe there already is a cure out there, and a lot of the higher ups, the richer people, are using it. Maybe it's not very marketable, whatever, you could market it. And then you would also be able to make money from that. That's the other thing that's interesting with a job, right? If you're somebody who's guaranteed 400 years to live, pension-wise, they won't have to pay your pension until, let's say 4 generations. You're getting that job, you know what I mean? Also, side note, insurance-wise, somebody who lives 400 years is guaranteed not to die in the lifetime of the person who is choosing basically how much your insurance would cost. That would be, your insurance prices would be so much lower than any other human being. You're guaranteed not to die for whatever amount of time you choose. Right? Where it's just stuff like that. You'd be working for at least 300 years, and then the amount of money that you could pile up. The stock market naturally has I think it's a 1% increase in revenue. If you put $100 into your stock, 50 years later, good amount of money, 400 years later, insane amount of money, incomprehensible amount of money if you choose even longer, right? So then it goes into what's most important to you, right? Is it money? Is it how smart you are? Is it how you look? Stuff like that. That's why the one with aging is interesting, because one of the worst feelings in the world is looking in the mirror and saying you're ugly, right? Thinking you're ugly. And as you get older, obviously your collagen goes down. You tend to look worse, right? So now you have to look at yourself for double, quadruple, whatever it is, the amount of time that a normal person does, and think that you don't look good. So would you be able to deal with that, right? And if you would, what would you do when you get older? And in this situation, right, you're guaranteed whatever amount of time that you choose. And you know, obviously, but does that mean that you still can't get sick, right? So mentally, physically sick, whatever. So what about a situation where you're senile for 100 years instead of those last few years of your life? How do you deal with that, right? So I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. But back to the you don't physically age and then you just die. I think that one is interesting, but it also comes with its own issues. So they honestly, they both come with the same issues for the most part, but death is the big issue, right? So somebody who has lived double the amount of time that a normal human being has lived would likely not really care about death anymore, right? Maybe even on like almost a psychopathic, or I don't know if psychopath or sociopath, but where you don't feel any empathy level. So it's like, would you rather it be that way and you don't feel anything at all, or would you rather feel all of that pain and anguish and all of your joy be stripped away from you because everybody around you died? Or how long would that take to get over that, you know? Like if your grandmother dies, right? It feels terrible for a while, and maybe you think about it for the rest of your life. But if everybody around you dies and you outlive everybody, that's tenfold the amount of pain as one person dying around you who is already older, and maybe you knew it was gonna happen or you didn't, but whatever, you knew it was gonna happen at some point. Now imagine that, but tenfold. I would say, arguably, I would rather feel that pain, because I think that pain builds character, right? But it's almost impossible to just feel that pain forever. I do think that you would become completely numb at a certain point mentally. And once you get to that point, it's like almost losing your humanity. And then you get into this is very interesting to me. If somebody lives for 800 years, right? That's a big number. How would it work with like the way that your days go by, right? Because everybody says every year that you live goes faster, right? So how much faster would it go? If you're at 700 years old, you know you're gonna live 800 years, right? Your days wouldn't turn into your weeks, your years would turn into your decades. It would be like that. All of your life gone. And then also the fact that you're thinking about death so much more when life is going that fast, and you realize how life is so fleeting, right? So then you have to deal with the idea of, I have 100 more years until I die, and I'm gonna be terrified to die until that happens. And then there's the interesting thing, like this is one thing that I would, that I already do research on, that I would love to do more research on, is like biblically, you have 100 years of research to do on God. You would be the closest to getting a finite answer about death than anybody ever. Because just time, man. It's if you spend 3 hours in a gym once, great, right? You're probably just gonna damage your muscles more than you would gain anything. If you spend every single day of your life in the gym for an hour, the muscle gain is gonna be insane. So you would be so close to that true belief, or that true non-belief, hopefully that true belief in God. that when you die, you would be freed. You would be in complete joy if God is real. And if he's not, then you would be able to have enough years to come to terms with that, which I think is a beautiful thing. And then it goes into education, right? You could be probably the first person ever to go to law school at 50 and then still be able to become a lawyer and do well for the rest of your life, right? Because that's the same as somebody being 25. If it's 200 years, if it's double the normal lifespan. But then why not choose something crazy, right? Like 2,000 years. And I would argue against something like that only because what if the world ends and you're still alive and you're just in pain as you're alive? Or just the idea of losing everybody around you and becoming completely numb and losing your humanity. So then it goes into how long would it take for you to lose your humanity, which I would argue 200 years. I would say 200 years, you have lost your humanity to the point where you could watch somebody die in front of you and you would feel nothing towards it. It could be your best friend. And then it goes into everybody in the world would be looking at you when you turn, like 200 years old. So now, whatever beliefs you have, you're able to give out into the world. I'm hoping, obviously, for me, it would be positive things, right? You would want to give out to the world. Also, social media-wise, if you're 200 years old, everybody's going to want to know, what's this guy thinking, right? You know? And then there's the fact that the older you get, right, the more historical things that you've gone through, and you can talk about from a first-person point of view, which is incredibly interesting. Who wouldn't want to read a book directly from a guy that came from ancient Greece, right? That would be an amazing thing to read. It would be so interesting, right? And then not to mention, once you make it to let's say 200, you would be fully rounded. You would have such a wide spread of information. And that I think that would be so fulfilling. And you would realize that there's constantly new things being made. You can never do enough research, right? There's always more. And you would realize that. And it would just be so fulfilling. But then it goes into the negative sides again, where it's like, what's the point, right? At some point, you are going to die anyway. What is the point of throwing your life, making your life for one purpose or something like that? So then let's say you're 100 years in and that clicks in your head and you go, I don't really want to do this anymore. You find something else that motivates you the same way that it did in your younger years. So maybe you could go to college, become a doctor. Maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe you want to look for cures for different diseases. Maybe you want to be a teacher, right? If you maybe you want to be like a teacher in. I'm very interested in philosophy. Maybe you want to research like philosophy and then go into teaching for philosophy, and then they would pay you to do research. Or maybe money is super important to you, right? Or you didn't worry about money in your first 100 years for the most part. So maybe let me see how I can become the richest person ever. Because why not? I have whatever amount of time left that you would choose. Why not do that, right? And then how would different people answer this question? I think a younger person, right? Let's say under 20 would say a way higher number. A person over 50 would say a way lower number. And I think that's because, well, you could argue the opposite too, but to a certain point, I think that it almost seems egotistical to a certain point, or not very humble, right? Because you're saying, I think that I should get this amount of years and nobody else around me would have it, or in the situation, everybody else around me would be able to either choose or have that amount of life. Or I honestly, I saw an interview and it was like this really, really old lady. And they were like, how do you live for so long? And she was like, you want to die, right? Want to die and you'll live. And I think it's because you lose your humanity as you get older and maybe even lose yourself to a certain point. where it's just like, is life even worth it? You know, people get tired. Everybody says, you know, use your youth, like, don't let the years fly by that fast, you know, be happy where you are. But I think that a lot of people, it flies by and they didn't enjoy much of it. They went through a lot of things, their friends died, whatever. And I think that a lot of people end up very suicidal later in life, which is interesting. Me personally, not somebody who's incredibly, I don't think I ever have suicidal thoughts for the most part. But that's a totally different subject. But yeah, I mean, just how many years would you choose? Now I'm gonna give what I would choose, 400 years. 400 years healthy, right? 400 years staying the same bodily, right? Barely aging and then just dying. And I would say 200 to 300 years if I were to age just at a less rapid rate. And my reason on that is if I'm able to stay young and spry and mobile, I have so many years to get stronger, look better, look spry, look better, whatever I said, sorry, it cut out again. Anyway, but I don't know if I want to have 200 years of being old, senile, losing collagen, looking worse by the day, by the year looking even worse. I don't know if I necessarily want to have that. And then I don't want to be senile. I don't want to forget everything that I just worked so hard for before I die. Because I think if you die and you forgot all of these things that you learned in those 200 years, then you're at the same point of somebody who died at 25 years old, you know, somebody who died really young, because you haven't come to that point where you want to be in life anymore, because it's been taken away from you. Your memory's gone. But I think 100 years and then maybe 50 of those, I would be old and senile. You know, maybe that would be okay. I think that would be, I don't know. I don't know if I would even choose, I don't even know if I would choose 200 years, 300 years, whatever. I think maybe 150 years if I'm going to age at a less rapid rate, but still age. Yeah. One more thing. Also being able to dial in what is healthy and what's not healthy, be able to test different things on yourself without knowing that it's going to harm you, without it really harming you, because you know you're going to die at this age. That would be interesting too. That would also be something that you could do a lot of research on. You could basically be a guinea pig. You know, you could experiment on yourself because you know it's not going to kill you. It might make you look worse, maybe you feel worse, whatever, but it's not going to kill you. You know that. You know you can live. And then it's basically, it's like human experiments that could not possibly damage you to the farthest extent. That's all. If you guys want, comment down below what age you would choose.